Dale Brown, who was Shaquille O'Neal's college coach at LSU. He tells this crazy story about Shaq one day, and the story goes one year during the finals. This is when the Lakers were playing the Pacers and they were playing away in Indianapolis. Dale Brown gets a call from a woman who lives in Indiana and says, "Hey, I know you don't know me, but I have a son who's in the hospital with a brain tumor. They've operated on him. They've done everything that they can. They don't think he's going to make it. And I was wondering if there's any way you think you could have Shaq call my son because he's such a big fan of Shaq's, and I want Shaq's voice to be one of the last voices that he hears." So Coach Brown says, "You know what? Sorry to hear about your situation. This is a playoff game for Shaq, but I give you my word that I will call him and see what he can do." So he hangs up the phone. He calls Shaq. Shaq picks up. Coach Brown explains the situation, and Shaq says, "All right, let me see what I can do." Hangs up the phone. He never hears again from Shaq about the situation, and he doesn't hear from the woman again. So 2 years later, Coach Brown is having dinner with some friends, and this woman approaches him and she says, "Hey, Coach Brown, you don't know who I am, but a few years back, I called you and I told you about my son with this tumor." And then Coach Brown cuts her off and says, "I know exactly who you are. How are you?" And she says, "I'm good." And he says, "So, did Shaq call your son?" And she said, "Coach Brown, Shaq did not call my son." So Coach Brown says, "I'm so sorry, but again, it was a very important time for him. And but I thought maybe he would, and I put a call in. I did what I could, but I'm sorry to hear that." And she said, "Don't be sorry." Shaq came to the hospital, spent an hour and a half in my son's hospital room. My son woke up, Shaq fed him. He laughed with him. He told him stories. He stayed there to the very last moment until he had to be at his game. And that was the most that my son had ever smiled and the best of spirits that my son had been in a very long time. And when I heard that story, that was just incredible. I've heard so many amazing stories about Shaq and how big his heart is, but stuff like that, man, that's just so impactful.
Use promo code TFU10 for 10% off at checkout.